The Zephyrian fleet hung in space like a collection of gleaming daggers, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with coordinated light patterns that spoke of discipline and order. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the scanner displays with growing satisfaction. The third moon of Kepler 442b showed all the signs of primitive civilization scattered settlements, basic energy signatures, and what appeared to be crude mining operations. Perfect, he clicked through his translator device. The Zephyrians had spent 3 standard cycles searching for a suitable world to establish their first colony outside their home system. Their species thrived on conquest, but they were practical about it. Why waste resources fighting advanced civilizations when primitive ones would serve just as well? Commander Yithrol approached with the standard pre-invasion report. Admiral, our scouts confirm the inhabitants are bipedal, approximately 2 meters tall, and appear to use basic projectile weapons. No energy shields detected, no spacecraft beyond simple atmospheric vehicles. Estimated population across all settlements is roughly 50,000. Kethver's mandibles clicked with pleasure. 50,000 primitives would make excellent laborers for their mining operations. The moon's core was rich with trilithium, exactly what the Zephyrian Empire needed to fuel their expansion. What about defensive capabilities? Minimal, sir. Stone and metal structures, some kind of chemical explosive devices, but nothing that could threaten our shields. We estimate complete planetary subjugation within 6 standard hours. The Admiral gestured to his tactical officer. Begin standard intimidation protocol. Drop atmospheric charges around their largest settlement. Once they see our power, they'll surrender quickly enough. 3 sleek fighter craft detached from the main fleet, their pilots eager to demonstrate Zephyrian superiority. They had performed this same routine on a dozen worlds. The atmospheric charges would create impressive but harmless light shows that typically sent primitive species into immediate submission. As the fighters approached the largest human settlement, something unexpected happened. Instead of cowering in fear, the inhabitants seemed to be moving, not in panic, but with purpose. The pilots reported seeing individuals running between buildings, but not away from the ships toward predetermined positions. Sir, the lead pilot's voice crackled through the communication system. The primitives appear to be taking defensive positions. Should we proceed with intimidation protocol? Kethver laughed, a sound like grinding metal. By all means. Let them play at being warriors. It will make their eventual surrender all the sweeter. The first atmospheric charge detonated 500 meters above the settlement, creating a brilliant flash of blue-green light. The Zephyrians expected to see the inhabitants fleeing in terror. Instead, they watched in confusion as bright streaks of light suddenly shot upward from multiple points around the settlement. What was that? Kethver demanded. Before anyone could answer, the lead fighter pilot's voice came through again, higher-pitched now. Sir, they're shooting at us. Some kind of projectile weapons, but the trajectories they're actually accurate. How are they tracking us at this altitude? The second pilot's voice joined in. These aren't primitive weapons. I'm reading velocities that shouldn't be possible with basic chemistry. My shields are holding, but barely. Kethver stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The energy signatures from the surface were all wrong. What they had assumed were simple chemical explosives were reading as something far more sophisticated. The projectiles being fired at his fighters showed acceleration patterns that suggested advanced guidance systems. Recall the fighters, he ordered. Bring them back for analysis. But as the 3 craft turned to retreat, something streaked up. From the planet's surface, something much larger than the previous projectiles. The lead fighter's pilot had just enough time to scream before his ship vanished in a brilliant explosion. The bridge of the flagship fell silent. In all their campaigns, the Zephyrians had never lost a craft to primitive weapons. It was impossible. Their intelligence was flawless, their technology superior, their tactics proven across dozens of worlds. Scanner analysis? Kethver demanded, his voice tight with control. What just destroyed our fighter? The sensor operator's voice shook slightly. Sir, the projectile showed characteristics of a guided missile with a nuclear warhead, yield approximately 50 kilotons. Nuclear weapons. These primitives had nuclear weapons. And they had just used one without hesitation to destroy a single fighter craft. What kind of species would immediately escalate to nuclear weapons against a scout mission? Commander Yithrol approached cautiously. Admiral, perhaps we should reconsider our approach? If they possess nuclear weapons. No, Kethver snapped. This changes nothing. So they have one or two advanced weapons? Probably stolen technology or a lucky development. We proceed with the invasion, but we'll use bombardment protocol instead of close support. But even as he gave the order, doubt gnawed at him. In 3 cycles of conquest, they had never encountered a species that responded to first contact with immediate, decisive violence. Most civilizations tried negotiation or fled or surrendered. These beings had simply started shooting, the remaining. 2 fighters limped back to the fleet, their pilots reporting that the ground fire had continued even after their retreat. Apparently, these primitives weren't satisfied with destroying one ship, they wanted to destroy them all. Sir, the communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from the surface. Put it through. A crackling voice came through the speakers, speaking in the local language that their computers quickly translated. The voice was calm, almost conversational. Unknown vessels, this is Scout Commander Sarah Chun of the Terran Colonial Marines. You have committed an act of war against a human settlement. You have 5 minutes to withdraw beyond the orbital. Defense perimeter, or we will consider you a hostile fleet and respond accordingly. Kethver stared at the communication panel. A single scout commander was giving him an ultimatum. Him, an admiral of the Zephyrian fleet, the audacity was breathtaking. Open a channel, he ordered. This is Admiral Kethver of the Zephyrian Empire. We claim this world by right of conquest. Surrender immediately, and you will be treated as valuable slaves. Resist, and you will all die. There was a pause before the human voice responded. When it came, there was something in the tone that made Kethver's skin crawl. It sounded almost amused. Admiral, I'm afraid you've made a serious mistake. This isn't a primitive world you can just conquer. This is a human settlement, and you've just killed one of our own. I suggest you leave immediately while you still can. The transmission cut out. Kethver stood frozen, trying to process what he had just heard. The confidence in that voice was wrong. Everything about this situation was wrong. But he was committed now. The Empire would not tolerate failure, especially not failure against a handful of primitives on a backwater moon. All ships, he commanded, prepare for orbital bombardment. Scout Commander Sarah Chun crouched behind the reinforced barrier, watching her tactical display with grim satisfaction. The alien fleet hung in orbit like sitting ducks, apparently preparing for some kind of bombardment. They had no idea what they were walking into. Rodriguez, what's the status on the orbital defense grid? She called out. Sergeant Rodriguez looked up from his control panel, grinning despite the situation. All 6 stations are online and tracking, ma'am. The aliens seemed to think we're just a primitive mining colony. Sarah almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The Kepler 442b settlement was indeed a mining operation. But it was also something else entirely, a forward observation post for the Terran Colonial Defense Force. What looked like simple mining equipment was actually a sophisticated early warning system, designed to detect exactly this kind of threat, the 50,000 primitives. The aliens thought they were facing were actually 5,000 of the most elite soldiers in human space, along with their families and support staff. The settlement served as both a working colony and a military installation, hidden in plain sight. Ma'am, Communications Specialist Liu called out, the fleet's moving into bombardment formation. 6 capital ships, approximately 2 kilometers each. Biotech design, unknown configuration. Sarah nodded. She had already sent an encrypted burst transmission to Terran Command. Help would be coming, but it would take time. The nearest fleet was 3 days away at best. Until then, they were on their own. What's our defensive situation, Sergeant? Rodriguez checked his displays. We've got the orbital defense platforms, surface-to-orbit missiles, and the underground bunker system. Plus, we've got something they definitely aren't expecting. He gestured toward the horizon where what looked like a simple mining facility hummed quietly. The mass driver is fully operational. Sarah smiled. The mass driver had been installed under the cover of mining operations. Officially, it was used to launch refined materials to orbital collection points. Unofficially, it could accelerate a tungsten rod to a significant percentage of light speed. The aliens were about to learn why humans didn't build defenseless colonies. Lieutenant Park, what do we know about their technology? The young intelligence officer pulled up holographic displays showing the scans from their destroyed fighter. Based on the wreckage analysis, they're using bio-integrated technology. Living metal that responds to thought commands? Energy shields powered by some kind of organic battery system. Impressive stuff, but it has weaknesses. Such as? Biotech is vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses. Also, their shield harmonics suggest they're designed to deflect energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. But they might not be calibrated for our specific energy signatures. Sarah considered this. Humans had developed their military technology in isolation, fighting wars against each other for thousands of years. Their weapon systems had evolved along completely different lines from anything these aliens might have encountered. "Sir," Rodriguez called out urgently, "the lead ship is charging some kind of weapon." Energy buildup across multiple points on their hull. Through the reinforced windows of the command bunker, Sarah could see the alien flagship beginning to glow. They were really going to try orbital bombardment against a human position. These aliens clearly had no idea who they were dealing with. "All stations, prepare defensive measures." Authorization code Omega-77. This is not a drill. Across the settlement, hidden weapon systems came online. What looked like communications arrays were actually point defense systems. Mining towers extended targeting arrays. The water treatment facility revealed itself as a military command center. The alien bombardment came as a series of bright blue beams that struck the settlement's outer perimeter. Where they hit, the ground simply disappeared, vaporized down to bedrock. It was devastatingly effective against normal targets. Unfortunately for the aliens, this wasn't a normal target. "Shields holding," reported the defensive coordinator. "Energy absorption at 30% capacity." Sarah had to admire human engineering. The settlement's buildings weren't just camouflaged military installations. They were built with energy-absorbing materials designed specifically for situations like this. The alien weapons were powerful, but they were simply feeding energy into the human defensive grid. "Return fire," Sarah ordered calmly. "Let's show them what a real military installation looks like." The response was immediate and overwhelming. 6 orbital defense platforms that had been masquerading as communication satellites suddenly revealed their true nature. Particle beam weapons lanced upward toward the alien fleet. The mass driver fired a sequence of tungsten rods at relativistic speeds. Surface-to-orbit missiles launched from concealed silos. The aliens' confidence evaporated as their shields began failing under the coordinated assault. Their biotech hulls, impressive as they were, hadn't been designed to handle this level of concentrated firepower. "Sir!" The alien communications officer was probably screaming on their bridge. "The planet's defensive output is exceeding our projections by a factor of 12. These aren't primitive weapons." Sarah opened a channel to the alien fleet. "Admiral Kethver, this is your second and final warning. Withdraw your forces immediately or we will destroy your entire fleet." The alien admiral's response came quickly, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "You're a mining colony. Our scans showed no military installations." "Admiral," Sarah replied patiently, "you scanned a human settlement. We don't build anything without making sure it can defend itself. Now, are you going to leave peacefully, or do we need to continue this demonstration?" On her tactical display, she watched as one of the alien capital ships suddenly lost power. The orbital defense platforms had managed to overwhelm its shields and disable its primary systems. The massive vessel began drifting, its bioluminescent hull flickering like a dying animal. "One of their ships is disabled," Rodriguez reported. "Should we continue the attack?" Sarah considered this. The smart thing would be to disable the entire fleet and capture their technology. But these aliens might have friends nearby, and revealing the full extent of human capabilities might not be wise. Negative. Let them see what happened to their ship, then give them another chance to leave. She opened the channel again. Admiral, as you can see, we've disabled one of your ships without destroying it. Consider this a demonstration of human mercy. We could have destroyed your entire fleet in the opening salvo. Instead, we're giving you an opportunity to collect your damaged vessel and leave our space. There was a long silence from the alien fleet. Sarah imagined the panic on their bridge as they tried to understand what had just happened. They had come to conquer what they thought was a defenseless colony and instead found themselves outgunned by a single settlement. What are you? The alien admiral finally asked, his voice small and confused. Sarah smiled grimly. We're humans, Admiral. And this is just a scout outpost. Our real military installations are much more impressive. It was a bluff, of course. This settlement represented some of the most advanced defensive technology humanity possessed. But the aliens didn't need to know that. You have 1 hour to collect your disabled ship and leave our system, she continued. After that, we'll consider any remaining vessels to be hostile and respond accordingly. The transmission ended, and Sarah watched her displays as the alien fleet scrambled to rescue their damaged ship. She had a feeling this encounter was far from over, but for now, they had bought time for reinforcements to arrive. Ma'am, Lieutenant Park asked quietly, what if they don't leave? Sarah checked her chronometer. Then we find out if 5,000 Marines can hold off an alien invasion fleet until the cavalry arrives. Admiral Kethver paced his bridge like a caged predator, watching his crew attempt to process what had just happened. The Zephyrian Empire's most advanced fleet had been humiliated by a single settlement. Worse, they had lost the Void's Edge, his second-largest capital ship, to what they had assumed were primitive weapons. Damage report on the Void's Edge, he demanded. Commander Yithril consulted his displays with trembling claws. All primary systems are offline, sir. The humans somehow overloaded our bioneural networks. The ship's living systems are in some kind of shock state. Our engineers have never seen anything like it. The Admiral stared at the drifting hulk of his warship. Zephyrian biotechnology was supposed to be self-repairing, adaptive, superior to any mechanical system. Yet somehow these humans had found a way to completely disable it? How is that possible? Sir, the chief engineer's voice came through the communication system. The human weapons appear to use some kind of quantum dissonance field. It's interfering with the bioneural pathways in ways we didn't think were possible. It's like they designed their weapons specifically to counter our technology. Kethver felt cold dread creeping through his system. The humans couldn't possibly know about Zephyrian technology. This was first contact, unless it wasn't. Scanner officer, he called out, expand our sensor sweep. Look for any other ships in this system. Anything at all. The young Zephyrian worked frantically at his console. Sir, I'm detecting multiple artificial objects throughout the system. They're everywhere. Orbital stations, automated defense platforms, what look like supply depots. How did we miss all of this? The terrible truth began to dawn on Kethver. This wasn't a primitive backwater system. This was a military installation disguised as a mining colony. But that raised even more disturbing questions. Communications, he ordered, open a channel to the human settlement. The same calm female voice answered almost immediately. This is Commander Chun. Have you decided to accept our generous offer, Admiral? Human, Kethver said carefully. How long have your people been in this system? There was a pause. About 8 standard years? Why do you ask? 8 years. The Zephyrian scouts had identified this system as uninhabited just 3 cycles ago. Either their intelligence was fatally flawed, or the humans had moved in and established a massive military presence in less than 2 years. Your settlement. How many humans are actually stationed here? Another pause, longer this time. When the human spoke again, there was something like amusement in her voice. Admiral, I think you're asking the wrong questions. The real question you should be asking is, How many other settlements like this one do we have? Kethver's blood went cold. If this was just one settlement and they had this level of defensive capability, open a priority channel to command, he whispered to his communications officer. Then louder, Commander Chun, I would like to propose a diplomatic solution to our misunderstanding. I'm listening. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting? A formal first contact protocol? Surely two civilized species can find common ground. The human laughed, and the sound sent chills through every Zephyrian on the bridge. Admiral, you opened communications by announcing your intention to enslave our people. You destroyed our mining equipment with orbital bombardment. You killed 17 of my people in that attack. We're a bit past diplomatic solutions. 17 dead? Kethver hadn't meant for anyone to die in the initial bombardment. The Zephyrians preferred their slaves alive and healthy. But these humans clearly viewed those deaths very differently than he did. However, the human continued, I'm willing to let you leave peacefully if you do so in the next 37 minutes. Consider it a professional courtesy between soldiers. What happens after 37 minutes? Our reinforcements arrive. Kethver's display suddenly lit up with new contacts. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, human ships, moving fast and in formation. His sensor operator's voice cracked with panic. Sir. Multiple contacts inbound. I count 47 ships ranging from frigate class to... Dear gods, what is that thing? On the main display, a massive vessel appeared that dwarfed even Kethver's flagship. It was angular, brutal in its efficiency, bristling with weapon systems. It didn't have the organic curves of Zephyrian bioships. It looked like it had been designed by engineers whose only goal was to destroy other ships as efficiently as possible. That, came Commander Chun's voice, is the TCS Retribution, a Devastator-class battleship. It's here because you killed our people, Admiral. The humans have a saying, don't start none, won't be none. You started something. The human fleet was moving with a precision that spoke of veteran crews and advanced coordination systems. They weren't rushing and recklessly, they were forming a perfect blockade, cutting off every escape route while maintaining optimal firing positions. Admiral, Commander Yithril whispered. Our intelligence reports describe humans as a recently spacefaring species. How do they have this level of fleet coordination? Kethver was beginning to understand just how badly their intelligence had failed them. Communications, get me a direct line to Imperial Command. Emergency priority. While his communications officer worked to establish the connection, Kethver watched the human fleet complete its encirclement. They moved like veterans, like a species that had been fighting space battles for centuries. Yet, according to Zephyrian intelligence, humans had only achieved interstellar flight within the last 50 years. Sir, the communications officer reported, we have contact with Imperial Command. The image of Supreme Admiral Voxstar appeared on his screen, the Empire's highest military authority. His expression was already grim. Clearly, word of the situation had reached the capital. Kethver, the Supreme Admiral said without preamble, explain to me how you managed to start a war with a species we've never heard of. Sir, the intelligence was wrong. Completely wrong. These humans aren't primitives. They have advanced military technology, hidden installations, and they fight like us. What do you mean, like us? Kethver struggled to find the words. Sir, when we announced our intention to conquer them, they didn't try to negotiate or surrender. They immediately escalated to lethal force. When we fired on them, they responded with overwhelming firepower. They think like warriors, Supreme Admiral. They think like Zephyrians. Voxstar was quiet for a long moment. How many ships do they have in system? 47 confirmed, sir. Possibly more. And their flagship? It's larger than anything in our fleet. Casualties? 1 ship disabled, minimal crew casualties. But sir, they could have destroyed us all. They chose not to. They're giving us a chance to withdraw. The Supreme Admiral's expression grew thoughtful. They're showing mercy? No, sir, Kethver replied grimly. They're showing confidence. They want us to leave so we can report back to the Empire? They want us to tell you exactly what we found here. The implications hung in the air like a poison cloud. If this was how humans responded to a first contact scenario, what would they do if the Zephyrian Empire actually declared war on them? Admiral, Commander Chun's voice came through the speakers. You now have 15 minutes before we consider your continued presence an act of aggression. I suggest you use them wisely. Kethver looked at his Supreme Commander's image on the screen. Voxstar's expression was that of someone who had just realized that the galaxy was much more dangerous than they had thought. Admiral Kethver, the Supreme Admiral said formally, you are ordered to withdraw immediately. Collect your damaged vessel and return to Imperial space. We need to reassess our expansion plans. As the Zephyrian fleet began the humiliating process of retreat, Kethver couldn't shake the feeling that they had just encountered something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Commander Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the TCS Retribution, watching the alien fleet limp away toward the edge of the system. Captain Morrison joined her, his weathered face reflecting both satisfaction and concern. Think they learned their lesson? Morrison asked, settling into the chair beside her. Sarah considered this. The immediate threat, yes. But I have a feeling we just opened a much larger can of worms. They called themselves the Zephyrian Empire, Captain. Empires don't usually back down from a single defeat. Morrison nodded grimly. He was a veteran of the Centauri conflicts, one of the few officers who had fought against another human colonial faction that had tried to establish an empire through conquest. What's your assessment of their capabilities? Advanced biotechnology, well-disciplined fleet movements, but their tactics are outdated. They rely on intimidation and overwhelming force against inferior opponents. When faced with equivalent resistance, they seemed unprepared. The settlement's defensive performance was impressive, Morrison admitted. Command is going to want a full report on how a single colonial outpost held off a fleet. Sarah smiled slightly. The settlement did what it was designed to do. The real question is what happens next. Those aliens are going to go back to their empire and report that humans are a significant military threat. That could go one of two ways. They either decide we're too dangerous to mess with, or they decide we're too dangerous to leave alone, Morrison finished. I'm guessing you think it's the latter. I do. Their technology suggests they're an expansionist civilization. Species like that don't tolerate potential rivals. As if summoned by their conversation, Lieutenant Commander Torres approached with a datapad. Ma'am, we've finished analyzing the debris from their destroyed fighter. You're going to want to see this. Sarah took the pad and scanned the technical readout. Her expression grew more serious with each line. How long have they been using this technology? Based on the bio-integration patterns, we estimate at least several centuries. This isn't experimental tech, it's mature, refined, battle-tested. Morrison leaned over to look at the data. What am I looking at? Evidence that we just picked a fight with a civilization that's been conquering other species for a very long time, Sarah replied. Look at these adaptive protocols. Their ships learn from each engagement, share tactical data across the fleet instantly. This is the technology of a species that has fought hundreds of different civilizations. Torres nodded. The bioneural networks show adaptation patterns for at least 30 different types of energy weapons, 40 different missile guidance systems, and defensive protocols for weapons we've never even imagined. Morrison was quiet for a moment. And they've never encountered anything like our technology. Exactly. We caught them completely off guard because our development path was so different from anything they'd faced before. But that advantage won't last. They'll adapt. Sarah handed the pad back to Torres. Send this analysis to Terran Command immediately. Flag it as Priority Alpha. We need every available fleet unit moved to defensive positions. And we need to accelerate the deep space early warning network. As Torres hurried away, Morrison asked the question that was bothering both of them. How long do you think we have? Hard to say. Depends on how their command structure works. how far away their main territory is, and how seriously they take the threat we represent. Could be months, could be years, or could be weeks, Morrison added grimly. Through the observation deck's windows, they watched the last of the alien ships disappear into hyperspace. The immediate crisis was over, but Sarah had the distinct feeling that they had just lit the fuse on something much larger. Captain, I want to recommend some immediate changes to our defensive posture. This engagement showed us several weaknesses in our standard protocols. I'm listening. First, we need better intelligence gathering. These aliens had completely wrong information about our capabilities, which suggests they scout potential targets from a distance. We need to know they're coming before they arrive in system. Morrison nodded. I'll recommend expanding the deep space sensor network. Second, we need to assume they'll be back with a much larger force. A single settlement, even a well-defended one, won't be enough next time. We need to think about system-wide defense. Orbital fortifications. More than that. We need to make it clear that attacking any human settlement means attacking all human settlements. The aliens seem surprised by our fleet response time. Let's make sure that becomes the norm, not the exception. Morrison was making notes on his personal device. What else? We need to study their technology more carefully. They use bio-integration, which means their ships are essentially living organisms. That gives them advantages in self-repair and adaptation, but it also creates vulnerabilities. Living systems can be infected, poisoned, disrupted in ways that mechanical systems can't be. You're thinking biological warfare? Sarah shook her head. I'm thinking electronic warfare, but targeted at biological systems. Their bio-neural networks are probably vulnerable to specific types of electromagnetic interference. We could develop weapons designed specifically to disrupt living technology. A new voice joined the conversation. That's already being worked on. They turned to see Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, the Retribution's chief science officer, approaching with her own data pad. I've been analyzing the sensor data from the engagement, Dr. Hawkins continued. Their bioships have some fascinating characteristics. The living metal appears to be a form of programmable matter, controlled by what looks like a distributed nervous system. Meaning? Morrison asked. Meaning their ships think, but not like a computer. More like a very large animal. And like any animal, they can be confused, frightened, or overwhelmed. The reason our quantum dissonance weapons work so well is that we essentially gave their ships a massive seizure. Sarah felt a grim smile cross her face. How long would it take to weaponize that effect? With proper resources? Maybe 6 months. But that assumes the aliens give us 6 months. Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the space where the alien fleet had been. They won't. If these Zephyrians are as experienced as their technology suggests, they'll move fast to eliminate a potential threat. Then we'd better move faster, Sarah replied. Dr. Hawkins, I want you to coordinate with the research stations at Sol and Alpha Centauri. Everything we learned from this engagement needs to be shared immediately. If the Zephyrians come back, we need to be ready for them. What about diplomatic contact? Morrison asked. Maybe there's a way to avoid a larger conflict. Sarah considered this carefully. Captain, in my experience, there are 2 types of civilizations, those that expand through cooperation and those that expand through conquest. The Zephyrians opened contact by announcing their intention to enslave us. That tells me everything I need to know about their diplomatic philosophy. So we prepare for war. We prepare to defend ourselves. There's a difference. Morrison turned back from the window. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like humanity just announced to the galaxy that we're not going to be easy prey. That's going to attract attention, and not all of it will be friendly. Sarah nodded slowly. He was right, of course. By successfully defending against the Zephyrian fleet, they had revealed that humanity possessed significant military capabilities. Other species would take notice. Some might want to ally with the new power, but others might decide that humans were a threat that needed to be eliminated before they grew stronger. Then we'd better make sure we're ready for whatever comes next, she said finally. because I have a feeling this was just the beginning. Supreme Admiral Voxstar stood in the war chamber of the Imperial fleet, staring at the holographic display that showed the humiliating retreat of Admiral Kethver's forces. Around him, the Empire's highest military commanders watched in stunned silence as the tactical analysis played out for the third time. "Explain to me," Voxstar said quietly, "how a single human settlement defeated 6 of our capital ships." General Wexler, the Empire's chief military strategist, manipulated the holographic controls. The humans employed advanced defensive measures that our scouts failed to detect. Their weapons appear to use quantum field manipulation to disrupt bioneural networks. It's unprecedented. Unprecedented doesn't explain how they knew to develop weapons specifically designed to counter our technology, War Leader Cavish interjected. This suggests prior knowledge of our capabilities. The war chamber fell silent. The implication was disturbing. If the humans had prior knowledge of Zephyrian technology, it meant either they had encountered the Empire before, or they had access to intelligence from other sources. What do we know about human expansion? Voxstar demanded. Intelligence Director Morvac stepped forward, his usually confident demeanor noticeably shaken. "Sir, our data on human civilization appears to have been inadequate. We believe them to be a recently spacefaring species with limited territorial holdings. Based on Admiral Kethver's report, this assessment was fundamentally flawed." How flawed? The human settlement was defended by technology that suggests they have been preparing for large-scale military conflicts for decades. Their response fleet arrived with coordination that indicates extensive military infrastructure. Most concerning, their tactics suggest they have significant experience in space combat. General Wexler pulled up additional displays. "We've analyzed the human fleet's movements during the engagement. Their formation patterns and tactical responses indicate a military doctrine that has been refined through actual combat experience. This is not the fleet of a peaceful exploration civilization." War Leader Cavish studied the data grimly. The question becomes, combat experience against whom? If humans have been fighting other species, why do we have no intelligence on these conflicts? The answer came from an unexpected source. Junior intelligence analyst Texmar, barely old enough to serve in the war chamber, raised a tentative claw. "Sir, I may have an explanation." Voxstar gestured for him to continue. "I've been reviewing our expansion records for the past 50 cycles. There are 17 systems that our scouts marked as uninhabitable or resource poor that, upon review, show characteristics consistent with inhabited worlds." The war chamber erupted in clicking voices as the implications became clear. General Wexler demanded clarification. "Are you suggesting that humans have been deliberately hiding their presence from our scouts?" "Not hiding, sir, misdirecting. The human settlement we encountered was designed to appear as a simple mining operation. If they've been doing this systematically..." Supreme Admiral Voxstar felt the cold touch of strategic disaster. "How many systems?" 17 confirmed, sir. But if their deception capabilities are this advanced, there could be many more. The holographic display shifted to show a star map with the suspect systems highlighted. They formed a rough sphere around what intelligence had identified as the human core worlds. It wasn't random expansion, it was a deliberate defensive perimeter. "They've been watching us," War Leader Cavish said quietly. "For cycles, they've been watching our expansion, studying our methods, preparing for this exact scenario." Intelligence Director Morvac looked sick. "Sir, if this analysis is correct, then the humans have been preparing for war with the Zephyrian Empire for decades. The settlement that defeated Admiral Kethver wasn't just a colony, it was a trap." Supreme Admiral Voxstar absorbed this information with growing dread. The Empire had built its power on the principle of overwhelming technological superiority. They conquered primitive species before they could develop effective defenses. But the humans had turned that strategy against them, allowing the Empire to believe they were primitive while secretly preparing advanced defenses. "What are our options?" he asked. General Wexler manipulated the displays to show force projections. We have three possible courses of action. First, we could negotiate. Offer the humans terms for coexistence. Unacceptable, War Leader Cavish snapped. The Empire does not negotiate with potential slaves. Second, the general continued, we could launch a full-scale invasion immediately. Commit the entire Imperial fleet to destroying human civilization before they can strengthen their defenses further. And third, we could withdraw from this region of space entirely. Mark human territory as restricted and focus our expansion in other directions. The war chamber fell silent as each commander contemplated these options. Supreme Admiral Voxstar knew that politically only the second option was viable. The Imperial Senate would never accept retreat or negotiation with a species they had already marked for conquest. What would a full invasion require? General Wexler brought up fleet deployment charts. Every available ship, sir. Based on the defensive capabilities we've observed, we would need to assume that every human system is similarly fortified. We're looking at a minimum of 3,000 ships across 40 star systems. Assuming our intelligence on human territorial extent is accurate, which it clearly isn't, Intelligence Director Morvac added glumly. War Leader Cavish studied the projections. The casualties would be enormous. Even with overwhelming force, we could lose 30% of the Imperial fleet. That assumes victory, Analyst Texmar said quietly. Sir, we've only seen the defensive capabilities of a single human settlement. We have no intelligence on their offensive capabilities, their fleet strength, or their industrial capacity. Supreme Admiral Voxstar felt the weight of command pressing down on him. The Empire had never faced this kind of strategic challenge. Every previous conquest had followed the same pattern: identify a weak species, overwhelm them quickly, absorb their territory and resources. The humans had broken that pattern completely. There's another consideration, General Wexler said carefully. Our bioships are designed to adapt to enemy weapons over time. But the quantum dissonance effect the humans used appears to target the biological components directly. Our ships may not be able to adapt to it. Meaning our technological advantage may actually work against us in this conflict. The more biological integration our ships have, the more vulnerable they are to human weapons. The strategic situation was becoming clearer, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. The Empire's greatest strength, their advanced biotechnology, appeared to be specifically vulnerable to human weapons. It was as if the humans had studied Zephyrian technology and designed their entire military doctrine around countering it. Sir, Analyst Texmar spoke up again. There's one more thing. The human response time was remarkably fast. From initial contact to fleet arrival was less than 1 hour. That suggests they have pre-positioned forces throughout their territory. Or, Intelligence Director Morvac said slowly, they have technology we don't understand. Faster than light communication, perhaps. Or transportation methods that exceed our own capabilities. Supreme Admiral Voxstar made his decision. General Wexler, begin preparations for a full-scale invasion. But I want extensive intelligence gathering first. We need to know exactly what we're facing before we commit the entire fleet. Sir, War Leader Cavish asked, what if they strike first? The humans know where our forward bases are now. They could launch a preemptive attack. The Supreme Admiral considered this possibility. The humans had demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to use lethal force. If they decided that the Zephyrian Empire represented an existential threat, double the guards on all frontier installations, and get me a direct communication line to the human settlement. If they want to talk, we'll listen. But we prepare for war regardless. As the war chamber began to disperse, Supreme Admiral Voxstar stared at the star map showing human space. Somewhere out there, the humans were making their own preparations. The question was, who would be ready first? 3 weeks after the Kepler 442b incident, Admiral Helena Cross stood in the Strategic Operations Center on Luna, watching real-time intelligence feeds from across human space. The massive holographic display showed a network of early warning sensors, defensive installations, and fleet positions that stretched across 47 star systems. "Report," she commanded as her staff assembled around the central table. Colonel Marcus Webb, Director of Threat Assessment, stepped forward with his usual grim expression. "Ma'am, we've detected significant Zephyrian fleet movements in 6 sectors. Intelligence suggests they're massing for a large-scale operation." "How large?" "Conservative estimates put it at over 2,000 ships, ma'am." "Possibly more." Admiral Cross absorbed this information without visible reaction. As Supreme Commander of Terran Defense Forces, she had been preparing for exactly this scenario since the first reports came in from Commander Chun. "Dr. Reyes, what's the status on our new weapon systems?" Dr. Carmen Reyes, head of the Advanced Weapons Research Division, consulted her tablet. "The quantum dissonance projectors are now standard equipment on all frontline vessels. We've also developed a more powerful version specifically designed to disrupt large bioships. Initial tests suggest it could completely disable a capital ship in a single burst. And the bio-warfare countermeasures? Ready for deployment. We've identified 17 different biological vulnerabilities in Zephyrian technology. Everything from engineered viruses that target their bioneural networks to electromagnetic pulses calibrated to their specific biological frequencies. Colonel Webb looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, are we really prepared to engage in biological warfare? The ethical implications?" Admiral Cross fixed him with a steady stare. "Colonel, the Zephyrians opened communications by announcing their intention to enslave our entire species. I'm not particularly concerned about the ethics of defending ourselves against attempted genocide." General Patricia Santos, head of fleet operations, stepped up to the display. "Admiral, we have a more immediate problem. Our intelligence suggests the Zephyrians have been studying the data from their encounter at Kepler 442b. They may have developed countermeasures to our quantum dissonance. Weapons. Explain. The biotechnology is adaptive by nature. Given enough time and data, their ships could potentially evolve resistance to our weapons. The question is whether they've had enough time." Admiral Cross considered this. It was the fundamental weakness of revealing their hand too early. Every tactical advantage was temporary once the enemy knew it existed. "What's our fleet disposition?" General Santos manipulated the holographic display to show ship positions. "We have 734 ships of the line distributed across our defensive perimeter, not counting system defense platforms, orbital installations, and the Mogul shipyards, against an estimated 2,000 Zephyrian ships." "Yes, ma'am. But remember, our ships are specifically designed for this type of engagement. The Zephyrians are still using conquest doctrine against a peer opponent." Dr. Reyes added, "There's also the industrial capacity factor. Human shipyards are producing vessels at 3 times the rate we estimated Zephyrian yards could manage. If we can make this a prolonged conflict, we win through attrition," Admiral Cross finished. "Assuming we can survive the initial assault." A new voice joined the conversation. "Ma'am, we may not have to." Everyone turned to see Commander Sarah Chun, recently promoted and transferred to strategic operations. Admiral Cross had specifically requested her presence for this briefing. "Commander?" "Ma'am, I've been analyzing Zephyrian military doctrine based on our encounter and subsequent intelligence. They're not prepared for a defensive war. Their entire strategic philosophy is based on quick conquests of inferior opponents." Sarah moved to the display and highlighted several star systems. "Look at their expansion pattern. They've never faced sustained resistance. They take a system, strip its resources, move on. They don't have the logistics network to support a prolonged campaign against a prepared opponent." Colonel Webb studied the analysis. "You're suggesting we make this expensive for them. I'm suggesting we make this impossible for them. Every human system they attack should cost them more than they can afford to lose. Eventually, the economic reality will force them to withdraw or seek terms." Admiral Cross nodded slowly. "A defensive strategy built around making conquest cost prohibitive. But that assumes they're rational actors making economic calculations." "Ma'am," Sarah replied, Their entire civilization is based on conquest and resource extraction. If conquest becomes unprofitable, their society will have to adapt or collapse. General Santos looked skeptical. That's a big assumption, Commander. What if they decide we're enough of a threat to justify any cost? Then we make sure the cost is their entire fleet. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Admiral Cross walked to the window overlooking Earth, thinking about the massive gamble they were about to undertake. Dr. Reyes, how long until the new weapons are fully deployed? Another week for the quantum dissonance projectors. The biological warfare systems need at least 2 weeks. We may not have 2 weeks, Colonel Webb interjected. Intelligence suggests the Zephyrian fleet could arrive within days. Admiral Cross made her decision. General Santos, implement Defense Plan Omega. All fleet units move to assigned positions. Dr. Reyes, prioritize the quantum dissonance deployment. Colonel Webb, activate all intelligence assets. I want to know the moment those Zephyrian ships enter human space. As her staff began implementing orders, Admiral Cross pulled Commander Chun aside. Sarah, I want you to prepare a backup plan. If this goes badly, if they overwhelm our defenses, we need options. What kind of options, ma'am? Scorched earth. If we can't hold our territory, we make sure they can't use it either. Industrial facilities, resource extraction, even the planets themselves if necessary. Commander Chun's expression remained steady, but Admiral Cross could see the understanding in her eyes. You're talking about making human space worthless to them. I'm talking about making sure that even if they win, they lose. The Zephyrians need to understand that attacking humanity will cost them everything. That's a very human approach to warfare, ma'am. Admiral Cross smiled grimly. Commander, I suspect the Zephyrians are about to discover that humans don't fight wars the way other species do. We don't surrender when we're outnumbered. We don't negotiate when we're outgunned. And we definitely don't go quietly into slavery. The command center around them hummed with activity as humanity prepared for the largest military conflict in its history. On the displays, human fleets moved into defensive positions while construction facilities worked around the clock to produce weapons and ships. Ma'am, Dr. Reyes called out, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. They want to talk. Admiral Cross exchanged glances with Commander Chun. Put it through to the main screen. The holographic display shifted to show the alien admiral they had encountered at Kepler 442b. He looked older, more haggard, but his voice was steady. Admiral Cross, I am Supreme Admiral Voxstar of the Zephyrian Empire. I understand you are the human military commander. I am... What do you want, Admiral? To offer you terms for surrender. Your species has shown admirable courage, but you cannot hope to stand against the full might of the Empire. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with ... consideration. Admiral Cross looked around the command center at her staff. These people had spent weeks preparing to defend their species against impossible odds. The idea of surrender was almost laughable. Admiral Voxstar, I have a counteroffer. Withdraw your fleets from human space, and we won't be forced to demonstrate exactly why that would be in your best interest. There was a pause before the alien responded. Admiral, you are outnumbered 3-1. We have technological superiority and centuries of military experience. What makes you think you can prevail? Admiral Cross smiled, and her expression was not entirely pleasant. Admiral, has anyone in your empire ever heard the phrase "come and take them"? The transmission ended, and the command center fell silent. Outside the windows, the lights of human civilization sparkled in the darkness, unaware that their fate hung in the balance. Well, Commander Chun said quietly, that could have gone better. Admiral Cross turned back to her displays, watching the approaching storm of alien ships. Commander, I don't think diplomacy was ever really an option. Now we find out what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object.